Okay, I think we're live right now. So hello everyone and welcome to our second ever live stream Q&A. I'm so excited to get to talk to you more and to get to interact with you like this. I had so much fun last time, so I'm really looking forward to answering some of your questions. Maybe if you can give me a little yes, I can hear you in the chat just to make sure that this is working properly, that would be great. I think there's a little bit of a delay, so I'm just going to keep going and I'm going to watch for your okay in the chat. But I just want to say thank you so much for your support of the channel. It means so much to me and Rob. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And when you do subscribe, make sure to hit the little bell to turn on notifications for the channel. And that way you'll stay up to date on all of the new videos and content that we're putting out. Also, if you want to help support us in a different way, you can check out our Patreon our Patreon page. I'll link to that in the description below. It's just another way to support the creation of our videos and to help us keep putting out new content. So just going over how the Q&A works. Basically, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat, the live chat, to look for questions that you are asking me. And Rob is also behind the scenes monitoring the comment section to just kind of help me pick out questions a little bit quicker than last time. So hopefully that'll ease the flow of the video this time. I also want to just give out a little disclaimer that I am not a doctor and I'm not a medical professional by any means. So any questions that are geared more to your own personal medical stuff or your own personal medical questions, I'm probably going to avoid or just say this again that I am not a medical professional, and so I can't really give personalized medical advice. What I'm doing is I'm giving just general advice based on my own personal experiences and just talking about really my own personal experiences. I'm not here to give anybody medical advice. So I just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork there for that. And so, yeah, moving forward, I think we're going to dive into some questions. All right. Okay, so are psychosis and schizophrenia the same thing? Great question. I think there's a lot of confusion around this. Psychosis is actually a symptom of schizophrenia, and it can be a symptom of other mental health problems as well. So psychosis is when somebody loses touch from reality, or when there's that break from reality and they experience things such as hallucinations, delusions, paranoid thinking, or that kind of thing. Schizophrenia is the broader illness that encompasses psychosis as a part of it. So that's kind of the differentiation between psychosis and schizophrenia. I think everyone who lives with schizophrenia experiences psychosis, but not everybody with psychosis has schizophrenia. Next question is, how do you go about telling someone you are scared because of the hallucinations without making it seem like you are losing control and making them worry too much? So that's a really great question that I kind of struggle with too, in terms of keeping that balance between having open communication with your loved ones and with those people in your life who are there who are supporting you, and balancing that with, I guess, not making them too worried or not finding that balance, I guess. And so I guess my advice would just be to open up these conversations as frequently as possible to get them as comfortable as possible with your symptoms and with how you're feeling about your symptoms. And then in that way, they'll kind of be on the same page as you a little bit more in terms of how worried to be in regards to how you're feeling about your symptoms or what symptoms you're experiencing. Did you have difficulty accepting your diagnosis? Yeah, I really did. So I went through a period of misdiagnoses where I was diagnosed with things like depression and then bipolar disorder, but with different kinds of bipolar disorder, and then finally schizoaffective disorder. So when I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, it was scary to get what seemed like a more severe label, but it also almost did come as a bit of a relief because it felt good to kind of understand my symptoms that I was experiencing and to have a bit more of a reason for what I was experiencing. But that said, I mean, there really are not a lot of success stories in broad circulation about people who are living with schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia. And so I guess I lost a little bit of hope when I was diagnosed. But through a lot of work in terms of figuring out how to live well with schizophrenia, essentially, and how to live a balanced life with my illness, I think I've come to a place of more self-acceptance, but it definitely is still an ongoing process in terms of self-acceptance. How do you handle substance abuse with schizophrenia? So that's a great question, because I think that there are a lot of people who deal with schizophrenia who have issues around substance abuse. And I get that, because when I'm having strong symptoms of my illness, it can be really tempting to just numb those a little bit with substances. And it can be it can feel good to kind of slow down some of the racing thoughts with like things like alcohol or whatever, or it can feel good to kind of have something else to focus on, but it really does not help in the long run, numbing these symptoms with substances. It really decreases my overall mental health to use these substances, and it makes it harder in the long run to manage my symptoms and to manage the illness. So while I understand the desire to kind of head that way, I would strongly encourage you to not, and to stay away from substances when you're living with schizophrenia, because it really just makes it harder to manage. And I think that there is a higher risk of being dependent on these substances. Okay, so then another question is, since taking the injection is better than taking the pill, why did you switch? Great question. So if you didn't know, I was on a long-acting injectable medication, but I don't know, about a half a year ago or so, switched back to taking oral medication. There was kind of several factors at play in terms of this, but the major ones were that the injectable that I was on were giving me a lot of really nasty side effects that I really didn't like. And so it was kind of a question around what was better. The risk of not being adherent or compliant with my medication, my oral medication, or the awful side effects that were happening with the injection. And the reason why I ended up switching was also because I moved in with my partner, Rob. So that kind of provided another layer of insurance in terms of taking my medication, because I had someone now who was there to kind of check in every night to be like, hey, Lauren, have you taken your medication? And just kind of to provide that encouragement around it to ensure that I keep taking it. Sorry, I'm just reading some of these questions. They're really great, by the way. Thank you so much to everyone who is submitting questions. Any early signs of schizophrenia before your diagnosis when you were growing up? So I'm not sure about like my childhood, if there was any early warning signs, and it's really hard to kind of determine if it was an early sign of schizophrenia or if it was just part of how I was as a child. But one that I talk about sometimes is how I was definitely more of a quieter kid. And I at times kind of struggled with socialization with some of my peers. And so this may have been an early warning sign or indication of what was to come. I didn't really start struggling though too much until my teenage years. During my teenage years, I went through quite serious depression, and I experienced things like thought broadcasting, so where I thought that other people could hear my thoughts, and a little bit more of that paranoid thinking started to happen in high school. like late teen years, early 20s, I began to have hallucinations. So it started out as olfactory hallucinations primarily, where I would smell these really awful smells that I couldn't identify and I couldn't locate the source of. And then I also began to start hearing like my name spoken aloud every now and then, even when I was completely alone. So in hindsight, it's easy to kind of identify some of these warning signs, but I think it's important that if you are experiencing these warning signs to not rush to the conclusion that, oh, I must be developing schizophrenia or whatnot, because it hasn't been like proven that was like early warning signs or indications of schizophrenia. That just happens to be what I experienced. So don't worry if you are experiencing some or all of this. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I would definitely suggest you discuss it with your doctor. I think those are the primary early warning signs or indications that I can think of off the top of my head in terms of my childhood and teenage years. I work in a hospital. Is there any advice you can give me when interacting with patients with schizophrenia? So I think the primary thing that I would advise or just encourage you to do is to just remember that they are people first and foremost. People with schizophrenia need all the same kinds of things that anyone else needs. They need love, compassion, companionship, and they need all those things, especially when they're in a vulnerable state in the hospital. And so just coming at things with a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion and just remembering that they are a person first and foremost, they are not their illness, will really go a long way. There's another question that came up. Is there a difference between schizophrenia and schizoaffective? Great question. I kind of use these interchangeably sometimes, and maybe I shouldn't, but the difference between schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder is that schizophrenia it's kind of like a combination between schizophrenia and a major mood disorder. So for me, I personally have schizoaffective disorder bipolar type. So you can have depressive type or bipolar type. So yeah, I technically don't have schizophrenia. I actually have schizoaffective disorder bipolar type. But that's the major difference between the two. Sorry, I'm just perusing the questions right now. How do you find a good psychiatrist? I'm on number 3 now, and I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong when looking for one. Good question. And so unfortunately, this is going to kind of differ from region to region in terms of how to go about accessing a psychiatrist and finding a psychiatrist. But I would just encourage you to keep trying, because finding a psychiatrist is a little bit like finding a therapist, where you really need to find one that's going to be a good fit for you. So if you don't feel comfortable with your current psychiatrist or therapist for any reason, don't feel bad. It's not, I'm sure it's probably not you. It's probably just because it's just not a good fit, not a good match or relationship match. So don't lose hope and just keep trying to find a therapist. Where I live, there are community clinics where you can go to gain access to psychiatrists. And if one isn't working out, again, I would just encourage you to keep trying with other ones. I think there are also private psychiatrists that you can go to. Unfortunately, they're a little bit more costly, but I would encourage you not to think along the lines of there being something wrong with you just because your current psychiatrist isn't a good fit. That's totally normal to just not have a good fit with your psychiatrist or your therapist, and definitely keep trying to find one that will be a good fit. Okay, next question is, are you fully aware of your situation when your symptoms become severe, or do you become non-cognitive? Also, how much control do you have when all of this is happening? Okay, so for me, I think I kind of come in and out of it a little bit in terms of being aware of having my illness and being aware of how it is affecting my thought process in that moment. But for the most part, I'm generally not able to understand that what I'm experiencing is a result of my illness of schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. And so it's really hard to have that insight when my symptoms are severe. So what was the second part of that question? Also, how much control do you have when all of this is happening? I'm not sure if any of you have ever been hypnotized before, but it kind of feels a little bit like that, where you know and you understand what you were, or for me anyway, I knew and I understood what was happening, but I felt that I was just being compelled to do or say what I was doing and saying. It wasn't so much in my control. It felt more compulsive and just kind of like I wasn't totally in control, although I did kind of understand the situation and what was happening in that regard. So it's important when you're supporting someone like that to understand that and to realize that the person who's experiencing this is probably really scared in that situation because of what I've mentioned around understanding what is going on, but not really feeling totally in control of what is going on. So that's really important to keep in mind, that they're probably really scared. Okay, how to make it easier for someone to take the medication if they're always thinking something's in it. So this is one of my delusions, that I think that medications are poisonous, or that physicians are using them for mind control or to poison me or whatever with them. So that is definitely something that I struggle with. And so something that's helped me in the past is working with my psychiatrist. So he has given me samples in the past directly from the packet, and he kind of read the packet to me to kind of let me know what was in it, and then showed me exactly what he was giving me in the packet that came from the drug company. So that kind of helped to eliminate thoughts around them being poison or there being different kind of substances in it. In terms of when I'm actually going to take them, what's been helpful is, so I posted a picture of the poster that Rob gave me or made me with reasons why it's important to take my medication. And so just kind of going over those when I'm having thoughts about the medications being not great for me, just kind of having that external reassurance that, okay, no, these medications are going to help me, and here is why. Also, keeping the form from the pharmacist about what exactly the medicine is for and what is in it and that kind of thing also kind of helps sometimes too. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's kind of how I work around it. Okay, the next question is, I want to have kids in the future, but I'm worried about that. Any advice? Great question. That's something that I struggle with too. And I think the biggest advice I can give you in that regard would just to be to open up a conversation with your doctor or your psychiatrist around that, around if it's going to be a good option for you, and if you are going to be able to do it in a safe manner that's going to be good for both you and your future kid and your family. So I think that's going to be a really individual and case-by-case basis in terms of what the answer is for that. But for me, my experience of it is that I've been talking with my psychiatrist about it, and we've kind of been building up a plan around how to go about it in the most safe and supportive way that we can. And just trying to figure out how it is going to be feasible to do that with everyone's well-being in mind. So definitely having a conversation with your doctor or your psychiatrist around how to do that and whatnot. In terms of worries around passing it on, that's totally something that I grapple with too. And I don't really know if I have any good answer to that. That's a really big fear of mine, that I will pass on my illness to my child. And so I think the way I've kind of talked myself around that is just that 1 in 100 people live with the diagnosis of schizophrenia. And so there's going to be people who are born with the illness. And I figure that who better to raise those people than somebody like me, or like somebody who's living with the illness and who's managing it well, that can kind of help to empathize with the child and can kind of show them the ropes in terms of how to manage it effectively. So that's kind of how I get around the fears about passing it on. But that is definitely something to consider in terms of whether or not to have a child. Have you had people tell you that you don't seem schizophrenic? Is that frustrating for you? Yeah, all the time. Lots of comments on here, and lots of comments being like calling me a fraud or that kind of thing, or saying there's no way I have schizophrenia and that I'm an actress being paid by pharmaceutical companies. So I want to lay that, or like set that straight, that I am not an actress. I am a person who's living with schizophrenia that decided, or schizoaffective disorder, that decided to make a YouTube channel to increase awareness and understanding around the disorder. So is it frustrating when people say that? A little bit, because it indicates that there is still so much negative stigma around the illness, that they think that somebody who looks like me or who carries himself like me can't also be living with this illness. And they just immediately assume that anybody with this illness is lower functioning. I don't like that term, but is less able to function in terms of being a productive member of society, and looks a certain way, or engages in certain, they have a concept about what somebody living with schizophrenia looks like, and I don't fit that concept. And so they assume that I'm faking it or that whatever. But I think that there's so much room to talk about the spectrum of this illness, and to talk about or inform people about the different ways that it can present and the different ways that people can look while living with the illness. When I tell people in my own life that I live with schizophrenia, a lot of them are surprised to find that out, because I do generally hide it fairly well. So I think that that's another indication that there needs to be more of an open dialogue in society about these issues, because I'm sure there are other people in your life who are living with this diagnosis or with similar diagnosis who you might not necessarily guess are. And so just increasing openness around those conversations would go a long way in terms of reducing stigma around it. How do you know when you need to have a med change? So I work really closely with my psychiatrist on this, or I try to anyway. Usually when I'm experiencing more symptoms, or my symptoms are less under control, is kind of an indication that something needs to be changed or altered with my medication regimen. Or if I'm experiencing really bad side effects all of a sudden, that's another cause for having a conversation with my psychiatrist about switching up my medication. I think those are the two main reasons why you would need to play with your medication. But if things are going well for you, I would suggest not to mess with the good thing, and to just keep going with the medication that you're on. What do you find to be helpful when you're experiencing delusions from your partner? So I think what's most helpful when I'm experiencing delusions for my partner to do is to acknowledge the delusions, the delusional thought, or whatever I'm thinking that is delusional, and to talk about how it's making me feel, and to really empathize with how it's making me feel, but then to work on how we can move on and keep going with our day or with our life in general, with that still being my reality, but move on in a constructive manner. And so really lacing our interaction with a lot of empathy and compassion for what I'm feeling and the emotions that I'm feeling, but kind of also talking about how it's important to kind of put that aside and to move on together. With that still being the case, like not refuting it or anything, but moving on, moving beyond the delusion. Okay. Hey, Lauren, I was wondering how you manage your condition around the kids. Are you afraid that they will see you in psychosis, or does that not concern you? So that concerns me a lot. That was one of my biggest fears around having kids in my life, and I now live with 2 kids half the time, and parent them all the time, but they're in the house half the time. And so that is definitely a fear that they will witness me in a psychotic episode. So I think that we take a lot of precautions to kind of avoid that. And so if ever I'm feeling that I'm slipping into psychosis or whatnot, we engage our support system and remove the kids from the house to either go with their moms or to be babysat or whatnot. But I think definitely engaging a support system when having kids is really important, especially when you have schizophrenia. For anyone, but especially if you're living with a mental illness like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. Yeah, I think that's, yeah. Okay, how do you handle having someone tell you that something is a delusion? That's kind of a tricky one because that's kind of a triggering subject sometimes when I'm having conflict with Rob, especially because we're so close to each other, that when he alludes to the fact that I'm having sort of delusional thought or whatnot, and I don't feel that I am, that can be really triggering, and I probably don't handle it as best as I should. He's smiling at me right now, but I could handle that better, and maybe that's something to work on in terms of being more accepting of when people that I trust are coming to me with that concern. When I'm in the throes of psychosis, it's also kind of hard to accept people telling me that I'm delusional or that I'm not thinking straight or normally or well, because it's hard to have that level of insight when you're going through that. So that is probably definitely something that I personally can work on in terms of understanding that there are people in my life who I trust and who I trust to tell me these concerns that they're having about when I'm experiencing delusional thought or that kind of thing. Have you ever gone into denial and thought that there was nothing wrong with you? So it's kind of along the same vein, and yes, absolutely. This is part of the reason why I stopped taking my medication sometimes, where I think I don't have schizoaffective disorder or I don't have schizophrenia, and like I don't need medication to stay well. Like I can do this on my own, and I get into this delusional train of thought that I don't need medication, that I'm not really that sick. And this especially comes up when I have a prolonged period of wellness, where it's like, well, maybe that was just a fluke or something weird that happened that isn't true anymore, and I don't have this illness anymore. And so I find it is kind of easy sometimes to get tossed into that delusional thinking that there is nothing wrong and that denial that comes up. So that is definitely something to really be reflective of and to be aware of. How do you explain schizophrenia to children in a way they'd understand and be empathetic toward? Great question, and I'm trying to figure this out at the moment too, in terms of how to explain to the kids what I'm experiencing in an age-appropriate way, in a way that's not going to alarm them or cause any kind of trauma for them. And so what we've been doing is we've just been having more open conversations about mental health in general and about how important it is to take care of your brain. And they know that my brain is sick sometimes, and that sometimes I need a little bit more rest, or I need a little bit more, space, or they know that I take medication for my mental health and for my brain. And so just having those kind of base level conversations around what it means to take care of your brain and what it means to have a brain that is sometimes sick are kind of where we're at. And I think they're 4 and 7 right now. So as they get older, I think there's room to incorporate more specifics around what schizophrenia is and that I live with schizophrenia. But for now, we're just kind of laying the groundwork in terms of what mental illness means and what mental health means, and teaching them the importance of taking care of their own mental health. Okay, you mentioned in your holiday video that family members may not know how to broach the subject of mental illness. Can you suggest a productive way for family members to broach the subject? Great question, and I meant to include that in that video but had forgotten, so thank you for asking that. So this is going to kind of be another one of those case-by-case bases where you're going to need to gauge how comfortable the person you're wanting to ask is and how the best way to ask them is. But I think just some good kind of base level guidance pointers would be to just be honest. I think what I've responded to the most and what has touched me and really made me feel that the person really cares has just been when they've come from a really genuine place in terms of asking, like kind of voicing their empathy for the situation and really wanting to know how that person is doing. And another way to kind of build this bond in terms of talking about these harder things like mental health is to offer your own experience with it. So over the holidays, I had a family member who shared some of his own struggles and just kind of used that as a conversation opener where he said, hey, you're not alone. Like, I've had struggles too, and I would love to talk to you more about our shared experiences and more about what you're going through. And that really helped me to kind of be like, okay, I'm not alone. This person cares about what I've been through, and they want to talk to me about it. And so that was a really great way to open up the conversation. And so I think just being as genuine as possible in terms of asking the person how they're doing and instilling as much empathy as possible will really help in terms of opening up those conversations. Um, have you ever had a manic episode? Yes, so I have schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. So the bipolar component is definitely a role in my illness. And so I have had manic episodes where I've had really elevated mood and really elevated energy and just kind of didn't need to sleep and was just kind of bouncing off the walls with increased energy. And the delusional thought also came in terms of my mania, my manic episodes. I think what's more common for me, though, is hypomania, where you're in the level that is just below mania, but still increased from the normal baseline. So where you have like slightly elevated mood and slightly elevated energy, and like this is kind of a fun one to be in because it's generally not too like debilitating or intrusive to your life or whatnot, but you just feel really good. So you're just kind of high on life, so to speak. And that's kind of what hypomania feels like. And that's kind of what I get more often than full-blown mania. But yes, I have experienced manic episodes. Sorry, I'm just perusing the questions again. There's so many. Thank you so much. Since getting your diagnosis, what have you found the biggest adjustment you have had to make is? Was it work, family, or other things? I think so. It's kind of like all of the above would be the my answer to that question, but I think the biggest adjustment that I've had to make is just understanding my limitations. And so understanding that that I'm not always going to be able to do everything that I set out to do, that I think I can do in my mind, and just understanding the very real limitations that my illness brings along. So that just means that I can't do things like work as much or like put as much time into like the YouTube channel as I would like to do, just because I get really tired or I get disorganized thought and have a hard time concentrating. And just kind of symptoms like that prevent me from doing as much and as big of things as I want to do. But I think it's important to also understand that even if you do need to kind of shift your understanding of what you are capable of doing, you are totally still capable of doing things. It just might look a little different or it might take a little bit longer, but you are totally still capable of doing the things that you would like to do in your life. How did you tell Rob about your diagnosis? So I was terrified to tell Rob about my diagnosis because it's something that I was terrified the whole time I was dating to like have to disclose that. And it didn't go great with a couple partners, and I don't know, it was just something that I had a lot of anxiety around, and I was always so worried about the person accepting me. And I kind of felt a little bit less worried telling Rob because I don't know, it just felt a little different with him. Like we had a really strong connection from the beginning, and he's looking back and smiling at me again. We had a really strong connection from the beginning, and I just felt like he was someone I could trust with that information, and I felt that he was going to respond in a really open-minded and empathetic way. And so I decided to tell him fairly early, relatively speaking, to my other experiences with disclosing. I told him, I think it was 3 weeks into our relationship, into starting to date, and he took it so well. So what I did was I just got super nervous all morning in anticipation of telling him on our date. I was sweating profusely and just amping myself up about telling him. But we went on a date. I think we went on the streetcar that time, the streetcar over the high-level bridge in town. And then we walked to a park, and I sat him down and I said, there's something really important that I need to talk to you about. And I'm kind of worried how you're going to take it, but it's something that is important to me to talk to you about. And he was like, okay. But I told him I have schizoaffective disorder and kind of explained what it was. And he responded really greatly. Like he didn't react too much at all. I think he was processing at the time, but what he did afterward was he went off and did his own research on what it meant and really wanted to be as informed as possible about what it meant. And he was just really supportive about me disclosing my diagnosis. And I think the more open I can be with him and the more open I have been with him, the better it's been for our relationship. And so I would encourage you to disclose to your partner as much as possible about what you're experiencing in your illness, because I think it really just helps to strengthen the relationship, and it helps to be able to allow them to support you as best as possible. And I mean, if you do disclose to someone when you're dating and they don't respond well, do you really want to be with that person anyway? So I think that I built it up a lot in my head and got really stressed and anxious about it, but I don't think it needs to be that big of a deal, because if this person really cares about you and if you care about them, you're going to find a way to reach each other in an empathic way around disclosing your diagnosis. And if they don't respond in a great way, I don't think the relationship was really meant to be. So don't stress. Don't stress as much as I did. Sorry, I'm just reading the questions again. Do you have negative side effects on antipsychotic medication? Yes, I do. So I had kind of come to a place where I had a good balance in terms of positive effects of my antipsychotic medication that I was on, with not too many side effects. But in the past, I think one of the biggest ones was really severe weight gain. On one of the injections, I gained like 50 pounds in a really short amount of time. And so that was really hard to deal with. Also, things like reduced energy and just kind of like a little bit of sedation have been common side effects that have come up. But so I did find that really good balance. But then with my last hospitalization, there was a need to kind of tweak my medication a little bit. And I added a new medication that has kind of come up with a few other not great side effects. And this might be an overshare, but it's probably important to talk about because I think it's pretty common for people who are on antipsychotic medications. So antipsychotic medications produce an increased amount of prolactin quite often. And so this can cause things like lactation in men or lactation in women, but it's more unusual for men to experience it. And so my breasts have been like really sore, and like I've been experiencing those kinds of symptoms as well, which has been really, really kind of awful to manage and deal with. And so I am in the process currently of going back to talk to my psychiatrist to kind of try to figure out how to manage that and how to kind of alleviate some of those negative side effects while still maintaining an effective medication regimen. So I think we're going to wrap up pretty soon. Maybe I'll take another one or two questions. So I'll just kind of look for one or two. How do you help someone who experiences apathy as their most impairing symptom? That's a hard one for me because apathy is definitely something that I do struggle with, or that I have struggled with a lot more in the past. I think that's kind of something that you need to talk with your doctor about in terms of finding a medication balance, and if it's because of your medication, finding a medication balance that kind of reduces that level of apathy. If your apathy is a result of your illness, and I think that it can be a result of medication or your illness, that's a little bit harder to deal with. And I think it just is going to come down to the fact that you just need to really try to engage in life. That's kind of what I did when I was experiencing a lot of apathy, was I just threw myself into things that I knew I loved before and that I know brought me joy before. And I just kind of had that fake it till you make it mentality where I just engaged in the activities and the things that I knew brought me joy and fulfillment before, until it sparked some of that in me when I was feeling the apathy. And so I totally understand that that's a really hard one to press through and a really hard one to deal with, but keep working at it, keep trying. Okay, so the next one is maybe the last one that we'll go on today will be, what advice would you give to someone who doesn't have a reliable support system? So I think this is unfortunately a common problem, and it's a big problem because your support system is really your first line of defense in terms of catching symptoms and managing symptoms as best as possible. So what I would encourage you to do if you don't have an informal support system in your life is to do your absolute best and advocate for yourself as much as possible to get a more formal support system. So making sure that you have a psychiatrist who you have a good relationship with, who's there to support you, a therapist who you have a good relationship with, who's there to support you, having a good relationship with your physician, having a good relationship with nurses or dietitians, or as much support, medical professional support as you can get, I think is going to be really helpful in terms of making sure there are people in your life who are going to be able to help support you through the more difficult times. I would also really encourage you to try to build an informal support network as much as you can. Go to, if there are support groups in your area, that's a really great one. And that was one that really helped me to build a support system when I first moved back to Edmonton and didn't have the biggest support system in place. I went to a bipolar support group, and there I met a lot of people who were going through similar things that I was going through, and it really helped to kind of empathize with each other, and it really helped to just have that social interaction and social engagement around the difficulties that I was going through, and that really helped. So I would encourage you as much as possible to build your own support system if you don't have one currently. I know that can be really hard, but it is totally worth it, and I think it will have a really great impact on your mental health. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up there, but thank you so much to everyone for joining us on this live stream, our second ever live stream. It's been so great getting to answer more of your questions and to engage with you in a more direct way like this. It's been really awesome. So I just want to thank you again so much for your continued support. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already to our channel. And if you'd like to support the creation of future videos like this or like the ones that we produce on our channel, make sure to check out our Patreon page at the link in the description below. Thank you so much again for watching. Just a little update on how we're going to do these Q&As going forward. I think the next one is going to be a Q&A with Rob. So you'll get the support person perspective in that Q&A. So that might be a great one to kind of recommend to your friends or family who are in your life supporting you, to get his perspective on your questions. And then we might do one together, but then we are going to be doing, I think we're going to move toward having specific topics for the Q&As. So we will decide on the topic, and then we will encourage questions around that topic for that particular Q&A. And I think that will just help in terms of organization for people who are watching these videos after the live stream happens, and it'll just be more of a concentrated video topic to address. So thank you so much again for tuning in and for all of your wonderful questions. It's been so great. I think we're going to sign off now, but wishing you and your loved ones good health. Thanks so much, and bye.